With the first attempt at an American Fawlty Towers failing at the pilot, it would be 5 years before anyone dared to try again. Since that first attempt, Fawlty Towers had returned to critical acclaim, a second series of 6 episodes that are arguably even better than the first. But for America's second attempt, some change was clearly in order. And boy did they change.
I said, were you going to make any changes? And they said, well, we're just making one change really, we're going to write Basil out. And I remember thinking, you say that?
1983's Amanda's by the Sea has easily the biggest deviation from the original formula, replacing the Basil and Sybil characters with a widowed mother called Amanda. She runs a Californian hotel with a son and daughter-in-law, as well as French-Canadian waiter Aldo. And most notably, this version features Bea Arthur as Amanda, who was famous for her starring role in the sitcom Maude. Now I have to say that compared to Snavely, this is a far better adaptation. And I think a huge reason for this is Bea herself. She easily comes closest to capturing the irritation and snark of John Cleese's Basil, rather than the camp sarcasm of Snavely.
But what did you expect to see out of a window in California? The Eiffel Tower? Or perhaps Krakatoa erupting?
She can genuinely be a lot of fun to watch in this.
The lady will have the chef's salad and I'll have the fish. I want it boned, lightly battered, baked, not fried, basted at 3-minute intervals and garnished with seedless grapes.
One chef's salad, anything for you.
It's not an identical performance to Cleese's Basil. It especially lacks much of the indignant rage that defined him, but it's certainly an improvement.
Excuse me, gentlemen, but are you staying with us?
Now we're just eating here.
Good.
Another thing this series has over Snavely is the pace. Though never quite as manic, they really do come close to capturing some of the frantic energy that defined Fawlty's style. Actors are seemingly more willing to ignore the laugh track, which avoids the awkward pauses for laughter seen in Snavely.
Oh, they're packing boxes on the double.
Okay.
Mrs. Carter will be very comfortable in here. It's that big blue thing between the land and the sky.
I know what it looks like, I just can't see it.
I think one of the clearest examples of this would be the flashcard scene, handled in a way that's far closer to the original.
You'll have to excuse him. He's from Toronto.
Another key element that this adaptation gets right is the dramatic irony. This is at the core of many Fawlty Towers episodes, used when the audience knows the full context of a situation, but certain characters, usually Basil, get the wrong idea completely. It's great for crafting punchlines and putting our characters through increasing levels of stress or bewilderment. This is something that hardly appeared in Snavely, and when it did, it was often short-lived. However, Amanda's does a commendable job of replicating it. Sometimes it's simple. In one episode, there's a running joke where, for various reasons, people keep screaming.
If it's ruined, I am just going to scream.
You're going to love this wine, Mr. Jones.
Gradually leading to one guest thinking he's going crazy.
You heard screams.
Didn't you? Did you just hear a scream? No, I was afraid of that.
Did you hear a scream?
Yeah, but I'm getting used to it.
You didn't hear a scream.
But it can also be the main driving force of a plot. One episode has a group of people planning to kidnap a guest, so they slip him a knockout pill. Meanwhile, Amanda discovers that the fish she fed that guest might have been bad, leading her to assume that he's dead.
Oh, you didn't serve somebody that fish? Oh, I told Aldo to throw it out. It might have been bad.
To add to this, Amanda overhears 2 businessmen that were planning to meet the guest and mistakenly assumes they're hitmen.
Arn agrees to take this contract. It is curtains for the Jacksons. Bury them in a hole 6 feet deep.
We then get a pretty great farcical set piece where Aldo and Amanda are attempting to hide the body from the hitmen. Meanwhile, the kidnapping group are attempting to get him back. Countless misunderstandings ensue, which the audience always has the full context for.
What is it you want?
I want that shower cap.
I told you I will get it for you momentarily. Go to your room.
I'll get it for you. I'll be waiting in my room.
Now, it's worth noting that this episode's plot might seem similar to The Kippers and the Corpse, and this is another aspect that I think this series does well. The plot borrows elements from other Fawlty Towers episodes, but in a less explicit manner than Snavely. It takes the ideas and then re-engineers them into more of its own plot, creating their own unique setups and payoffs for each. Whilst you may spot similar ideas, it never feels like you're merely watching a recreation of an existing moment. And even then, some of the entirely new ideas have their merits too. One early episode has a sort of hostage situation situation in the hotel, which makes for some fun farce.
I'll get him over here and put his back to the door, and then you let him have it. How was it going out there?
How do you think it's going out there? Hey, why isn't she tied up yet? I thought I told you to step on it. How come I gotta do everything?
And I'll also credit that the show was far more willing to end on a downbeat defeat, a contrast to the sugar-coated ending of Snavely. However, it's sadly not all positives for this show. Whilst the pace and plotting is usually fairly strong, the spoken lines is where things really begin to fall apart. In general, the dialogue just isn't as fun, interesting, or witty as the original. Some of the jokes are frankly bizarre.
My optometrist recommended eyeball aerobics. It's an experimental treatment, but it's proven successful with laboratory owls.
There's one joke about sending Aldo to Waiter's Prison.
Have you ever heard of Waiter's Prison? It's a maximum security institution for undesirable waiters.
But it's not even really a joke. She basically just says, "Have you heard of Waiter's Prison? It's a prison for waiters." But if I'm being fair, there is a little payoff to it later.
Where are you going?
I'm going to the waiter's prison.
As well, despite the dramatic irony being much stronger than Snavely, it's still not on the same level as Fawlty Towers. There's one episode where Amanda thinks she keeps seeing her son and his wife flirting with different people, a sort of rough adaptation of the wedding episode. However, where this version gets lost is that everyone gets wrapped up in the misunderstanding. More and more characters walk in on each other and see mildly questionable things at best, and from that assume that everyone is cheating on each other. The original episode works because it's very much based in Basil's character and his traditionalist views on sex and marriage.
We'd like a double.
2 singles, dear, not married. Now,
What?
He's the sole person misunderstanding things, and it's primarily due to his mixture of fascination and disapproval.
When people are not very happy in their own lives, and particularly if they're not getting enough sex, they tend to become much more censorious of other people. I think it's a kind of envy disguised as disapproval.
I don't suppose you've got a...
now look! Just don't push your luck. I have a breaking point, you know.
It's just not as believable to me that everyone would assume people are having affairs based on what they've seen. Plus, having everyone fight isn't nearly as funny as Fawlty's ridiculous shouting monologues.
I think you know what I mean. I mean, you have had a very, very good time, haven't you? Well, not here you don't. Oh no, thank you and good night.
This lack of character-driven storytelling really highlights that they just aren't as developed as the originals. Amanda's son sometimes calls her out for her attitude. I guess he's sort of like Sybil in that regard, but he's usually proven wrong in the end anyway. Her daughter-in-law is just a materialistic airhead, existing more as an annoyance for Amanda.
Because I have news for you that is going to destroy your life.
We have moths?
There's also a chef whose main character trait is that he rambles a lot.
Well, the fish, you got 2 possibilities. You could have a piece of fatty fish, you could have a piece of dry fish. Let's say you got fatty fish. Well, the fatty fish are allowed to get a lot of smoke.
They might occasionally have funny moments, but they're unbelievably one-dimensional and nowhere near as interesting as the originals. But easily the biggest issue here is that Amanda herself just doesn't have anywhere near as deep a character as Basil. Despite her performance, Bea just isn't really given much to work with. She gets a lot of fun, sarcastic things to say, but the motivation to say those things is never quite as fleshed out as Basil. So much of Basil's motivation is entrenched in his personal beliefs, whether that's his conservative Protestant views, his lack of physical intimacy, his support of the class system, or his pride in his nation.
Is that what made Britain great and truthfully and made a mistake?
Amanda occasionally possesses some of the same beliefs as Basil, such as how she sucks up to those of higher status.
I am Judge Peterson of the Superior Court.
Judge! Oh, Judge, you don't want 101, Your Grace. No, it's a madhouse in there.
But other times she's motivated by entirely different desires, like her physical attraction to a guest.
Who's David?
The hunk we just put in 101.
With Basil, you understand why he's so rude and irritable. Either it's the attitude of his guests, his complete lack of patience, his prejudice, or often his cowardice. Basil is desperate to save face and boost the hotel's status, and this informs much of his manic behavior.
Now, on the celery front, well, perhaps I should explain. We normally get our celery delivered on a Wednesday, along with our cabbages, onions, walnuts, grapes.
At best, I guess Amanda is just kind of jaded? B might deliver her lines well, but I struggle to see what's motivating her to treat her guests and staff like this. Another difference is that Amanda is far less frequently the butt of the jokes. In Fawlty Towers, the joke was nearly always on Basil. He was the one losing out, getting hassled, or allowing his flaws to get the better of him. But the nebulous character of Amanda means that she lacks any concrete flaws, so ultimately less humor is derived from her. Once again, the wine scene from the original, which exposed Fawlty's lack of knowledge, has now been replaced with insulting comments.
People who know the difference between a claret and a Bordeaux.
A claret is a Bordeaux.
But out.
Often Amanda's irritation with the guests just seems unjustified. Basil looked down on guests he considered riffraff, and with how some of them acted, it can be hard to blame him.
I'm afraid he gets everything cooked the way he likes it at home.
Does he?
Yes, I do, and it's better than this shit's garbage.
Now, Ronald.
These eggs look like you laid them.
At the same time, his desperate desire to save face is usually what causes him to take things too far.
Anyway, this will explain everything.
What's that?
A letter. A letter from the chef.
Basil can be unintentionally rude to guests in his desire to keep things running smoothly.
A sherry, lovely.
Oh, good. Large or not quite so large.
With Amanda, we get the room with a view conversation, but what's missing so far has been the guest's irritating and demanding attitude. Mrs. Richards is a wonderfully monstrous character who storms her way into any interaction.
Yes, Mr. Thurston.
What?
Thank you. I was wondering if you
I
could go...
need change for this.
In a moment. I'm dealing with this gentleman.
But I have a taxi driver waiting.
Meanwhile, Amanda is just rude and standoffish to a guest for simply raising an issue.
I need a telescope to see that. Well, may I suggest that you consider moving to a hotel closer to the sea? Or preferably in it.
Because Amanda's by the sea is not by the sea.
Well, then, may I suggest that you move to a hotel that is closer to the sea? Or preferably in it?
And I just assumed that since I'd be playing the John Cleese role, I would have a husband who would play the equivalent of his wife. And he was the complete bumbler who she kept the hotel going, It ended up I didn't have a husband. They gave me a daughter-in-law and a son. The only similarity to Fawlty Towers was that we had this little busboy.
Another important character discussed in this regard would be Aldo, their take on Manuel. Like Petro, he's overall less vocal than Manuel, but he does do a decent job of matching his mannerisms. However, the character's origin has now been changed to a French-Canadian from Toronto. Once again, I have no idea if there was an existing stereotype of French-Canadian waiters in America, but I think he's missing the cultural difference that defined Manuel's character. Manuel isn't just facing a language barrier, he's also working alongside Basil's strongly traditional views. Aldo, on the other hand, just doesn't have such a situation. Now, if I'm being fair, Aldo is perhaps a little more sarcastic and cheeky than Manuel, which contrasts with Manuel's optimistic attitude.
Was the meal satisfactory?
I have had the pleasure.
And so perhaps this was an attempt to tackle the less dramatic difference between French, Canadian, and American culture by giving the character a little more agency. But ultimately, I just can't really place Aldo. He's not nearly as problematic as Petro seems to be, but he's also far from the beloved character that Manuel is. I can credit Tony Rosato for putting in a pretty good performance, but sadly the character just isn't quite right. Another thing worth mentioning about Aldo would be the physical abuse he receives. This is something that was very present in the original, but it's a lot less cartoonish and farcical here, which unfortunately makes it feel just a bit crueler. Now, as the other side characters go, they're not too bad. There's nothing nearly as memorable as anyone in Fawlty Towers, but a few stick in my mind. One episode has a very sensitive and disturbed woman who witnessed her husband get killed in a hotel.
Now, it's very important that she gets through this weekend without incident. You understand?
Oh, sure.
And this is mined for its comedic potential with a pretty good payoff later.
Mrs. Fawlty, dear, is there anything wrong?
However, something that's really quite bizarre about this series is how dramatically it changes during its run. It certainly sounds like there were a lot of behind-the-scenes alterations, attempting to figure out exactly what to do with the show.
And then the network stepped in and said there's no real threat here, so they brought in someone who played a bank manager that I don't know, there was a mortgage.
So whilst the first few episodes come close to capturing that Fawlty Towers style, it eventually devolves into a much slower paced serialized dramedy. The farcical elements dissipate, and the series instead focuses on developing a relationship between Amanda and her brother-in-law. I can always respect an adaptation for trying to make itself into something new, but at this point it hardly resembles Fawlty Towers anymore. It's probably worth a watch if you're a B. Arthur fan, but there really wasn't enough to sustain my interest through these latter episodes. Interestingly, the series did take a small break after airing the first 6 episodes, so this really does seem like an attempt to re-engineer the show behind the scenes. But no matter how many new characters or interweaving plot lines they throw in, you can't change the fact that the fundamental characters just aren't there in this version.
Darling Norman came and looked at it and said, well, it's very simple. He said, you don't have a character. There's nothing, you're not playing anything.
Ultimately, whilst the plotting and pace is certainly an improvement, Amanda's just lacks much of the character and intricacy that really made Fawlty Towers so special. I would honestly recommend checking out the first few episodes if you're looking for something entertaining and with that Fawlty Towers style. But comparing the two side by side, it's clear Amanda's just doesn't hold up. But where Amanda's merely stumbles, Payne sadly plummets.
Yes, what is it, you little streetwalker?
Oh yeah, hey, I think I have like a Discord now or something, so like check that out if you want. It's probably a link in the description or something.